Hi, this is Dr. Go, and this video is on some good approaches for the Schradieck exercises, technical exercises for beginners. So let's get started. Now, first thing that's very important before you start any sort of technical exercise on the violin, make sure you tune your violin properly. Whether it's 440, 441, 442, you decide, choose with your own teacher and decide. But here's the thing that you have to realize. From what I was taught when I was a student is that violins tend to sound better with perfect or just intonation instead of tempered intonation. Tempered intonation is what we find on pianos or keyboards. So the distance of the semitone from the third to the fourth and the seventh to the eighth on a piano, identical. They're the same amount of cents apart. In perfect intonation, they are not the same. So you will find that if you tune the violin strings in perfect intonation, not tempered, but perfect intonation, you will find that if the A is dead center, 0 cents on A440 or A442, so if you will, then depending on the room you're in, the D, if it's perfectly in tune, will be approximately 2 cents flat. Now, I have seen if there's a fan directly over your head, the tuner will actually show when it's perfectly in tune that you're only 1 cent flat. But that's because there's a fan directly over your head. And I find that in different rooms and such, the exact same tuning will show a little bit differently depending on what's going on in the room. Like I said, the fan directly over your head can mess up some tuners. So it's good to try to have a stable environment when you're using your tuner to really see what is truly perfect intonation. So there are sites online you can find to really find just really truly what is perfect intonation or just intonation instead of tempered intonation. But whatever the situation is, please try to make sure your strings are absolutely to the best intonation, the best in tune that you can make them. And with that being aside, let's start. So we're taking a look at the Schradieck exercises, and they're the ones that you can look at. So in these, I like to do 3 steps. Okay, step 1 is I like to have my students drone the open E string while they're slowly doing the exercise. So it'll look like, and you can hear the first finger really gets tested and the fourth finger really gets tested against the open E. So I like to have them do that slowly, the whole line. Then if they do this successfully a few times and they're used to this, then we go to step 2, which is joining the open D. But before we go to that, I want to insert one thing. Before the students learn this, I like to teach them a basic arm vibrato. And when doing this exercise, I don't want them to use vibrato. I want them to use just a healthy life in the hand, which is a very slight vibrato motion to ensure that, number 1, the wrist is in a good supported proper position. Number 2, there is an element of relaxation going on through motion. We solve tension through motion. You should never be static and try to move the fingers with a static arm, because that means you are holding, and some muscle somewhere in your shoulder, arm, back is holding stationary. That means there's tension being built up. This is not a good precedent to have if you really want to have healthy violin playing being taught, yes, and being practiced. So there should be life in it. Now, I'm not an advocate of giant vibrato when you're doing intonation. That's ludicrous, okay? It should just be a gentle life in the hand. Any more than this is too much. It shouldn't be a big thing like this, just barely moving. And the reason I teach them vibrato first is to make sure that motion is correct, with the first joint being loose and supple. Yes, loose, flexible, supple, and just very slowly moving. So that being said, then we go to step 2, which is the open D string. And you can see with D string, we really hear that third finger. You kind of get the first finger, but you have some leeway. If you're not really familiar with playing 6, the interval is 6, you can miss a little bit. But with the open E string, step number 1, with the open E string and the 4th, there's very little leeway. It has to be in tune. So that's why I start with step number 1 of the open E string, to make sure that first finger is really properly set. And depending on the school of violin playing you're from, now some schools ask the thumb to be in coordination with the middle finger. Most that I know have in coordination with the first finger. I was taught with the first finger. I found a lot of benefits for it. I do see benefits with the second finger as well, but for certain situations, I don't say either one is good or bad. They are for me, they are tools in a toolbox used for different situations. So for this exercise, however, I like thumb in coordination with the index finger. I find that it helps to set up the hand frame nicely on this exercise. So there are times when I will have a moving thumb for certain exercises for certain students. For this, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, I like a stable thumb in coordination lined up with that first index finger. Now, this is step 1 and 2, E string drone. Step 2, D string drone. Step number 3, I like to say it's free. I want the student to first understand the concept of why we do step number 1 with the open E string, why we do step number 2 with the open D string, and then let them start to experiment between E and D string. They can sit there and change their patterns every single time the cycle comes. The cycle happens 4 times in the first line. And what I'm looking for is that they show an understanding and an open mind or experimentation ongoing as they're going through that first line. That means if they're sitting there and being overwhelmed and stuck, I want them to go back to steps 1 and 2 in order to really get that understanding, and then go home, practice, or maybe practice in front of me, and really try to get this open-minded view and understanding of steps 1 and 2, so that they can start to play with the intervals that are being made with the open drone strings, and start to see what intervals their ears are more sensitive to, because everybody's a little bit different. The way they hear 7/6 thirds and stuff, everybody's a bit different. Some people really, without training, they hear 6th more intently or accurately than they hear a 4th. For me, I hear a 4th more accurately, but again, I'm not my students. My students are different. So I've actually come across people where they hear the 6th more accurately than they hear the 4th. So they have to have a different application and approach to step number 3, which is the free application. So I hope this helps, and I hope there's something in here that you find useful. Again, if there's anything in here that I'm saying that is contrary to what your teacher is telling you, please ignore me and listen to your teacher. That being said, I wish all of you the best on this wonderful journey on the incredible instrument we call the violin. Cheers.